Good morning, guys. This morning, we're going to be talking about a concept that is going to help us transition to start talking about marketing strategy per se, which is the whole goal of this unit. But we're going to start by recapping some of the ideas that we have seen in the activities that we have done so far. So the first thing that we have to think about is you have already done an activity in which you had to recognize some features of markets, some characteristics of them. Why is it important that when you look at a company, you get to know its market as well? First of all, is to understand the prospects for growth. When a company, remember, we talked about the analogy of the fish and the fish tank. When a company is inside a market that isn't really growing, there isn't a lot of room for the market for the company itself to grow. So, for example, if you're gonna sell a product that a bunch of people already sell, and it seems like people aren't really gonna buy any more of that product, then there isn't a lot of prospects for growth in that market. Not to say that you couldn't possibly make a profit, but it's just that your growth is sort of capped at the size of the market itself. So in order to understand how much you can actually grow within a market, you have to see how much the market itself is growing. And also, of course, who else is having a share of that pie, or having a portion of that, the amount of money that people are going to spend in that product anyway. Also, we want to explain why companies make some decisions. So, especially when you think about companies in the long term, why is it that they decide to relocate, for example, or why is it that they decide to launch a new product, or why is it that they decide to change their company structure so that they can, sell something different? These kinds of things often have to do with what the company is seeing in terms of where the market itself is going in the long term, and also to think about how strategically you can sell to the customers that you already have. In addition to knowing the size of the market and the speed at which it is growing, for example, you had to look at the segments that the market has. And so, for example, different people respond to different promotions, so you can't really sell to them the same way, which we would call mass marketing. Mass marketing basically means you sell the same thing to everyone in the same way. But we want to think about how to target marketing to specific people. So target marketing is basically catering to the segments that you were talking about, that you looked at in your exercise. And finally, you want to know what position you're playing within your market. This is something that we call positioning. So basically, once you get to know the competitors that are already there, vying for that same share of the pie, you can also know where do you stand. If you're a newcomer, you probably have to have a very distinctive and high quality product if you want to compete in a market that's already very much established. If the market is growing and there's not a lot of competitors, then that means you probably stand a good chance to have a strong position early on. Um, so, what does it mean when a market is growing? Let's say that you figure out that the market that you want to go into is growing. Um, Here you see an example. This is the United States soft drink market. So Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, things like that. This is the amount of money that people are spending in that country on soft drinks. Every year after year, as you can see, the market is growing. In 2018, it was 678,000. In 2017, it was 647,000. So that means that the amount of money that people spent on soft drinks actually went up by about $30 million. Why does a market grow? So there's a few reasons, as you can see on your screen. One of the reasons why markets grow is because more people are interested in the new product. That means that there's more people that decide to buy the product that didn't buy it before. In the case of soft drinks, do you think that this is the case? Do people drink more soda because more people are interested in soda than they were before? I highly doubt it. So it could be something else. Another reason why market grow is because people they decide to buy more of the product itself. So it doesn't mean that people are more interested, but it means people perhaps have more money in their pocket, and that's one reason why they decide to buy things like soft drinks, because they have the money. So if you were poor, you would think twice about buying a soft drink, instead of just drinking whatever you have at home. But if you have a little more money in your pocket, you might decide to make that choice. However, it could also have to do with other factors. For example, your marketing could just be working out very great for you. People might be more aware that soft drinks are an option, and so they might go for a soft drink more often than they did the year before. And that is probably what is happening with Coca-Cola. Just the marketing is so efficient that people decide to buy it just anywhere they are. They go for a run in the park and there's a vending machine there. They go to the supermarket and they decide to buy soda by the case. And so the sales just increase over and over. The final reason could also be because people are more, they're okay with paying more for a product, which is what we would call price-driven growth. When the price of something increases, let's say, for example, an iPhone, it doesn't mean that the market are necessarily selling more, but if the price is higher and the final revenue is higher, then the market itself is growing, even if people aren't really buying more of that product. So that is what we would call price-driven growth, and it's not the same. Probably what is happening here in the soft drink market that you see here is that people are just buying more of the product, but it's the same amount of people, and it's probably the same price that they are used to paying. So one thing that it's important to know is that the market that you just saw is divided among the people that sell that product. So each company that sells something in that market is said to have a market share. So to go back to the analogy of the fish in the pond, if you have a pond of a certain size, the number of fish that you have there vying for a share just makes it so that, the bigger the company is, the more successful its marketing, the bigger its share of the pie, or the bigger its share of the tank is going to be. In general, market share is believed to be a measure of the company's marketing success. If your marketing is successful, then more people know you, more people buy you, and more people prefer your product in the long run, which means that you hold a bigger share of the market. One important consideration when considering market share is that when it's a new product, a lot of people will try different things. But when it's an old product that people already know, usually people are habit-driven creatures. So that means that if they already know your product and they like it, they are more likely to stay with it just because of that than for any other marketing that they might get, from you or from others. This is the way that that pie, that cake is divided for the U.S. soft drink market. As you can see, the biggest player in this market, no surprise there, was Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is the blue bar that you see at the bottom. Pepsi, as a share of the market, as you can see, if you go back all the way to 2004, the market was basically divided between Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Pepsi had a huge share of the market, not half of it, not nearly, as much as Coca-Cola, but it was a fairly sizable share. Now, take your eyes all the way back to 2018, and you will see that the share of the market that Pepsi had, that Pepsi has today, has reduced significantly. Coca-Cola, on the other hand, has stayed pretty much the same. It's not that people, as a share of the market, decide to buy more Coke. It's just that, like the preference for it has been fairly strong, and probably they've gained new customers to make up for any that they might lose at some point. If you look at the gray bar, Dr. Pepper and Snapple, which is a group of soft drink brands, has been increasing its market share over time, and it's not Coca-Cola that is losing; it's Pepsi. So if I were in charge of Pepsi's marketing, I'd probably ask myself, what are we not doing that Dr. Pepper Snapple is actually doing? If I were Pepsi, I would have to think, where can I get more of the market? It's definitely not from Coca-Cola, which is probably a very strong competitors, but I could probably decide to take a shot at Dr. Pepper Snapple's brand, share of the market. There's also a growth in that other category, which is that yellow bar at the top. That one looks like it's probably drinks that are not similar to the soft drinks. It could be something like kombucha, or drinks that are not necessarily carbonated, but people prefer because they think it's healthier. So definitely what we see here is a change in preferences. And so any soft drink company that decides to market to people in this market is going to have to take into consideration how the preferences are changing and how this leads to changes in the share of the company. One last thing that I think is interesting for you to notice is that revenue for Coca-Cola in the United States actually went down. In 2017, the revenue was $36 billion. In 2018, it was $34 billion. So what does that mean? Does it mean that, if you notice the market share is just the same, but what it means is that, as a share of the whole market, probably for that year, the market itself, even if it grew, its share pretty much remained the same compared to the rest because of the way that the sales were distributed. So market share is not necessarily the same as the sales level, although it is part of it. What matters is also what else, how much is everybody else selling as well. Now, when somebody like Coca-Cola is able to say that they have the biggest share of the market, they come to be called the market leader. It is important to know that market leadership is not the same necessarily as the most name recognition. Just because you have most recognition, most people, most people know you. For example, more people know Pepsi than they know Dr. Pepper Snapple. But it also doesn't mean that, like, because you have that name recognition that you sell just as much. You could be very well known and also have a relatively small market share. It also doesn't mean that you make the most profit or the most revenue. Some companies make a lot of money by, being just very efficient. They don't spend a lot of money in costs, so whatever they sell they get to keep, and so their profit margin is pretty high. It also doesn't mean that they make the most revenue as a company. It just means that they make the most revenue as a product within a market. Because sometimes, for example, you may have a company that makes a lot of money in other things, but they make some money within a market and they have a small share of a certain market, but they have big shares of other markets. So as a company, they make more revenue because they have different kinds of products, not just one. And they don't just compete in one market, they compete in several markets. And finally, the other thing that it doesn't mean, market leadership doesn't mean that you have the highest prices. It just means that you sell the most within a given market. The next concept that I want you to take into account is market share. How do you know how much of a market you actually have? Well, the way you calculate it is by looking at the sales of a company within a given time period. Now, this can be calculated in different ways, so we're going to have to be careful with that. And I'm going to explain just to you just how in a little bit. The formula, as you can see here, is the firm's sales in the time period divided by the total market sales in that time period. So, for example, in the case of Coca-Cola's market share, that would be Coca-Cola's shares for a given year. So, for example, Coca-Cola's sales for 2018 divided by the whole market sales in 2018. So, one divided by the other. We're going to do a little experiment now. So this is a small town in Veracruz, San Antonio, Texas, Veracruz. No joke. I've literally driven through it. And it's this tiny town of 1,000 people in Veracruz, which only has 2 tortillerias. I'm making this up, by the way. So there's only 2 corn tortilla stores in the whole town. Tortilleria Doña Mari and Tortilleria El Encanto. For a given month in 2019, Tortilleria Doña Mari sold 450 kilos of tortillas. Tortilleria El Canto sold 430. As you can see, it might be pretty clear who the market leader is here already, but we also have to calculate the sales by revenue. That is, how much money did each tortilleria make? So what I want you to do is I want you to calculate the relative market share of each. So the steps to do this is you have to do 2 things. You have to look at how much the total sales in the market were, how much kilograms of tortillas were sold by both tortillerias, and then determine in percentage points how much percentage did Doña Mari sell of that, and how much, how big a percentage did Tortilleria El Encanto sell of that. And then you also have to calculate the revenue. So how much in total sales, the amount of kilos that they sold multiplied by the price, how much money did Doña Mari make, for just one single product, and how much did El Encanto make for that one product. And then I want you to calculate who has the larger market share and who is the leader. Now, please pause the video and work this out on paper by yourself. I'm going to give you some time to work on that. And then when you're ready, play the video again and see what your answers, see if your answers were correct. Okay, I hope you actually paused the video. Here are the answers. So as you can see here, the total market sales for this town were 880 kilos of tortillas. Because Doña Mari sold 450, she is the market leader in this regard because she sold 51% of all tortillas sold in San Antonio, Texas, Veracruz for this month of 2019. And on the other hand, Tortilleria El Encanto is only 48.87% of that market. As you can remember, there's only two companies, so the companies are bound to have, somewhere close to 50%, but there's one clear leader here. Now, things get a little trickier when you think about revenue. If you remember what revenue was, revenue means the price of the item, the price of the product, multiplied by the amount that was actually sold. So when you calculate this, you see that Tortilleria El Encanto has a slightly higher revenue in total. So this means that when you consider just the sales, the units sold, Tortilleria Doña Mari is the leader. But in this case, because we're also considering how much money the company actually made, Tortilleria El Encanto becomes the leader of this market. So, how do you get to market leadership? How, if you're a company, do you achieve that dream of becoming the leader of the market? Having everyone recognize your company and everyone think about your company as the company within that market. Well, the way that you do that is by adopting the right marketing strategy, and that's the topic of tomorrow's lesson. And the right marketing strategy, whatever focus you give it, is going to create perceived value for your product among consumers. That means that people think, when they think about your product, that it is worth the money that they are spending. And we're going to talk about that tomorrow as well. Okay, I hope I hope that everything today was clear and that you're making good notes for tomorrow's quiz.